Welcome, and thank you for joining me in this quiet space. Tonight, we are going to embark on a very gentle journey, a journey not through distance, but through time and the fading ink of history. Before we begin, I want you to find your most comfortable position. Allow your shoulders to drop away from your ears, and let the weight of the day begin to dissolve into the softness beneath you. Tonight, we are exploring a mystery that lives in the archives of our world, a cartographic puzzle that has intrigued historians and dreamers alike for generations. It is the story of a name that once commanded the vastness of the globe, a name that appeared on the finest maps of the 18th century, written in bold, elegant calligraphy, and yet a name that has almost entirely vanished from our modern vocabulary. That name is Tartary. Close your eyes for a moment and imagine a room, perhaps a library, filled with the faint, comforting scent of old paper and beeswax. On a heavy wooden table lies a map from the year 1780. As you lean in, you feel the cool, textured surface of the parchment. It is thick and slightly irregular, preserved through centuries. You trace your finger along the edges where the paper has turned the color of weak tea, frayed and softened by time. The map is a work of art. You see the intricate compass roses, the tiny hand-painted ships navigating the indigo oceans, and the delicate mountain ranges drawn like rows of sleeping giants. But as your gaze moves toward the center of the great Eurasian landmass, your eyes settle on a region so immense it seems to dwarf everything else. Across the rolling steppes, the high plateaus and the frozen forests of the north, the mapmaker has inscribed the words, Grand Tartary. In the late 1700s, this wasn't just a footnote. It was a titan of geography. To the people of that era, Tartary was a reality that stretched from the Caspian Sea to the distant Pacific Ocean, covering nearly half of the known world. It was a land of legend and trade, of nomadic empires and mysterious cities. It was a name that carried the weight of thousands of years of human movement. And yet, as we look at our world today, that name has slipped through the cracks of history, replaced by new borders, new nations, and a different way of seeing the earth. Tonight, we are going to slowly, carefully, untangle the threads of this vanishing act. We will look at why the name was used, who the people of Tartary really were, and how the shifting tides of science and politics eventually wiped the word from the map. There is no rush. The mystery has waited hundreds of years to be told, and it can wait a little longer as we drift together into the past. Let the rhythm of my voice be your guide as we turn back the pages, back to a time when the world was still being measured by the stroke of a quill, and when Tartary was the greatest horizon of them all. Breathe in and let the journey begin. Before we travel further into the heart of this mystery, I want to invite you to settle even more deeply into your surroundings. If you are tucked under a warm duvet, or perhaps resting on a soft chair, let yourself feel the weight of your body pressing down, supported and safe. There is nowhere else you need to be right now, and nothing you need to do but listen. If you find peace in these quiet explorations, perhaps you might consider subscribing or leaving a gentle like on this video. It is a small, kind way to help our community grow, ensuring these restful stories can continue to reach those who need a moment of calm. But for now, Let that thought drift away like a leaf on a still pond. Just breathe. Take a long, slow breath in through your nose. Hold it for just a heartbeat, and then let it out with a soft, effortless sigh. Feel the tension leaving your shoulders, your neck, and your hands. Imagine that with every exhale, the world outside becomes a little quieter, a little more distant. Tonight, we are not just listeners. We are quiet observers of a cartographic puzzle. We are detectives of the ancient ink, looking for clues hidden in the graceful lines of the past. Think of the year 1780. It was a time of great change, yet the world still felt vast, and in many ways beautifully untamed. To a person living in London, Paris, or Philadelphia, the interior of the great Asian continent was a place of immense scale and profound silence. When they opened an atlas, they weren't looking for the precise digital coordinates we rely on today. Instead, they were looking at a tapestry of human knowledge woven from the reports of weary explorers, the ledgers of silk merchants, and the inherited wisdom of ancient scholars. In the soft candlelight of a scholar's study in the late 1700s, these maps were spread wide across heavy oak tables. They were beautiful hand-colored sheets where the ink was often mixed with natural pigments. Deep ochre for the sun-drenched deserts, indigo for the unexplored seas, and a soft, dusty green for the endless grasslands that seemed to go on forever. And there, dominating the center of the world, was that hauntingly beautiful name, Tartary. It wasn't just a label to them, it was a way of understanding the unknown. As we begin to solve this puzzle, we must first try to see the world through their eyes. We must look at the lines they drew and the words they chose to describe a place that, to them, was as real as the floor beneath your feet, yet as mysterious as the stars above. To understand why this name eventually faded, we must first understand exactly what it meant to the people who carefully inscribed it onto the maps of the 18th century. To truly understand what Tartary was, we must first gently unlearn our modern idea of what a country is. Today, we think of nations as having very sharp, precise borders, lines on a digital map that tell us exactly where one law ends and another begins. But in the 1700s, the world was understood differently. When a cartographer in London or Paris dipped their quill into a well of dark ink to write the word Tartary across the center of Asia, they weren't describing a single kingdom with one king or one capital city. Instead, Tartary was a vast, quiet label for a vast, quiet part of the world. It was a general term used by European map makers to describe a region of almost unimaginable scale. Imagine a blanket of history and geography laid gently over the heart of the largest continent on Earth. This region stretched from the shimmering, salt-crusted shores of the Caspian Sea in the west, all the way across the rising sun to the rocky coastlines of the Pacific Ocean in the east. It reached from the frozen silent tundras of the far north, down to the towering snow-capped peaks of the Himalayas and the Great Wall of China. To the Europeans of that era, Tartary was a geographic convenience. It was a way to categorize the immense interior of Asia, lands that were often difficult to reach and even more difficult to measure with the tools of the time. It was a place of endless horizons, where the wind moved through the tall grasses of the steppes like a soft breath. Because these lands were so far away from the busy ports of Europe, they remained a beautiful mystery, and so the name Tartary acted as a placeholder for a world of diverse cultures and ancient traditions that the West was only just beginning to truly see. 'Tis helpful to think of it as a mosaic. Within the borders of what the maps called Tartary, there were many different groups of people, many different languages, and many different ways of living. There were nomadic tribes who followed the seasons across the plains, and there were settled cities with vibrant markets and intricate architecture. But from the perspective of a map maker sitting in a quiet room thousands of miles away, all of these varied lives and landscapes were grouped together under this one evocative name. At the time, Tartary was often divided into smaller, descriptive sections to help the viewer navigate the scale. You might see Russian Tartary in the north, Chinese Tartary to the east, or independent Tartary in the central plains. These weren't necessarily political boundaries, but rather ways of saying who had the most influence in those quiet, distant stretches of earth. It was a term of scale, a term of wonder, and a term of shared history. It represented a baseline of knowledge, a foundational understanding that this massive part of the world existed, even if its finer details were still hidden behind the veil of distance and time. As we look closer at these maps, we begin to see how this name wasn't just a word, but a doorway into a different way of seeing the planet, a world that felt much larger, much slower, and filled with a quiet, enduring mystery. To truly understand the story of Tartary, we must look at the maps themselves, the physical artifacts that have survived the centuries. Imagine, if you will, standing in a quiet library where the only sound is the soft ticking of a clock and the gentle rustle of paper. Before you lies a map from the year 1780. It is a large, heavy sheet of handmade paper, slightly rough to the touch, with edges that have softened and frayed over time. The paper has aged into a warm, creamy hue, like the color of tea with a splash of milk. As your eyes wander across the page, you notice the incredible artistry of the cartographer. In the late 18th century, a map was not just a tool for navigation, it was a work of art. The title is often enclosed in an ornate frame called a cartouche, decorated with hand-drawn illustrations of flowing robes, distant mountains, and perhaps a compass rose with delicate, needle-thin lines. The ink, once a deep black, has faded into a gentle charcoal, or a soft, earthy brown, making the entire image feel peaceful and settled. Across the vast open space of the Asian interior, the words are written in elegant, weeping calligraphy. You see the letters start near the shores of the Caspian Sea and stretch out syllable by syllable all the way to the edges of the Pacific Ocean. The name often written there is Grand Tartary or Grande Tartarie. The letters are large and looping, their flourishes dancing across the plains and deserts depicted on the parchment. It is a name that commands space. It doesn't crowd the map. Rather, it breathes within it, filling the silence of the unexplored territories with a sense of dignity and scale. The colors used to define the borders are equally soft. They were often applied by hand with thin brushes and diluted watercolors. You might see a faint ribbon of dusty rose tracing the mountain ranges, or a wash of pale mossy green following the curve of a river. These colors don't shout, they whisper. They guide your gaze across the Grand Tartary, showing how it sits as a massive central heart to the continent. To look at such a map is to see the world as it was perceived then, a place where the unknown was not a void, but a beautiful, labeled expanse. This physical record, this ink on paper, is our primary witness to the name's prominence. It shows us that for the people of 1780, Tartary was as real and as permanent as the ink that defined it. It was a fixture of the world, a grand title for a grand land, waiting quietly for the turn of the century. As we trace these lines with our minds, we begin to wonder why such a prominent fixture of the world's image would ever need to change. Yet, there is a quiet mystery that begins to unfold just after this decade of the 1780s. If you were to look at a map from 20 or 30 years later, you would see something curious happening. A subtle visual shift that feels almost like a trick of the light. That large, sweeping name, Grand Tartary, which once seemed so permanent, begins to lose its boldness. The ink seems to grow lighter, and the letters begin to shrink, making room for new words, new lines, and new borders. It is as if a great ancient fog is slowly lifting from the center of the continent, revealing a more detailed, yet more fragmented landscape beneath. This period, the end of the 18th century, was a time of profound transition in how humans viewed the earth. Up until then, Tartary had served as a vast, poetic umbrella, a way to describe a part of the world that was known to exist, but had not yet been measured with the cold, hard precision of modern science. It was a beautiful generality, a word that filled the gaps where explorers had not yet trodden. But as the 1780s drew to a close, a new spirit of discovery began to take hold. This was the peak of the Age of Enlightenment, a time when scholars, geographers, and monarchs felt a deep, quiet hunger for accuracy. They no longer wanted to use one broad traditional name for half a continent. They wanted to know exactly where one mountain range ended and the next began. Think of it like a photograph slowly coming into focus. At first, you see a large, soft shape. That is the Tartary of the old scrolls. But as the lens of history turns, that single shape resolves into many smaller, distinct images. You begin to see the rise of the Russian Empire to the north, pushing its administrative boundaries further into the frozen woods and the deep taiga. You see the Qing dynasty to the east, solidifying its hold on the grassy plains and the high plateaus. As these powerful empires claimed the land, they brought with them their own names, their own languages, and their own maps. The mystery of why Tartary seemed to vanish is not a story of a lost civilization sinking into the earth, but rather a story of the world becoming more defined, more categorized, and more measured. It is the story of how a single romantic name was gently partitioned into the modern names we recognize today. The borders were shifting, not just on the ground, but in the minds of the people who drew the world. The grand, sweeping calligraphy of the 1780 maps was being replaced by the sharp, thin lines of scientific cartography. As the 18th century faded into the 19th, the Grand Tartary that once commanded so much space began to dissolve piece by piece into the administrative provinces and sovereign territories of a changing world. It is a peaceful transformation, like the way the morning stars fade when the sun begins to rise, one light being replaced by another, more detailed one. We are witnessing the moment when the map stops being a dream of a distant land and starts becoming a blueprint of the modern world. This transition is quiet, steady, and inevitable. And as we watch the old names fade, we begin to see the true shape of the continent emerge from the shadows of the past. Before we move deeper into the maps and the changing borders of the 18th century, I would like you to take a moment just to settle. Let the history rest for a second. If you haven't already, let your shoulders drop away from your ears. Feel the weight of your body supported by the bed beneath you. You are safe. You are comfortable. There is nothing you need to do right now but listen and breathe. Take a slow, deep breath in and let it out with a quiet sigh. Feel the rhythm of your breathing like a gentle tide coming in and going out. Imagine that rhythm is the same as the wind blowing across the vast open plains of the Asian interior. This is the land we are talking about, the Great Steppe. It is a place of immense silence and incredible scale. Close your eyes, if you like, and picture a horizon that never seems to end. In every direction, there is the pale gold of dried grass, swaying slowly under a violet twilight sky. There are no buildings here, no roads, no humming of engines. There is only the soft, rhythmic rustle of the wind and the occasional call of a distant bird. The air is cool and smells of sage and sun-warmed earth. It is a place where time seems to slow down, where the hours stretch out as long as the landscape itself. In the 1780s, travelers would have looked out at this very same horizon. They would have felt the same stillness. To them, this was the heart of Grand Tartary. It wasn't just a name on a piece of parchment, it was a feeling of profound space. As you lie there, try to capture a bit of that space for yourself. Let your mind expand, becoming as wide and as quiet as the steppe at night. There is so much room here for your thoughts to simply drift away like clouds passing over a high mountain range. The names of countries and the lines of empires are small things compared to the ancient earth itself. The land remains, even when the words we use to describe it change. We are just observers, passing through the history of a place that has always been here, silent and steady. Let that steadiness ground you. Feel the peace of a world that is much larger than our daily worries. You are part of this vast, beautiful world, and for now, you are simply resting within it. As we prepare to look closer at the origin of the names, hold on to this feeling of quiet. Keep your breathing slow and steady. We are going to gently peel back the layers of the word Tartary to see where it came from and why it carried such weight for so long. But for now, just enjoy the stillness. Just listen to the silence of the great open plains. You are drifting closer to a deep, restful sleep, and the story will continue to guide you there, softly and surely. The mystery is not a burden. It is a gentle path we are walking together through the cool, quiet halls of time. Feel the air moving in and out of your lungs, steady, calm, and peaceful. In the heart of the steppe, there is only the stars and the wind. and you are resting under that same vast sky. As we drift through the history of these maps, we might wonder where the word Tartary actually came from. It's a word that sounds heavy, almost ancient, like the rumble of distant thunder over a plain. But like many things in history, its origin is a mixture of real people and the imagination of those who lived far away. If we go back many centuries, long before the maps of the 1780s were drawn, we find the root of the name in the East. There was a confederation of nomadic tribes known as the Tata. The word itself is simple and rhythmic, Tata, Tata, much like the steady beat of a horse's hooves on dry earth. These people were part of the vast tapestry of the steppe, living in harmony with the cycles of the seasons and the movement of the herds. But as stories of these nomadic warriors traveled westward, across the mountains, and through the forests of Europe, the name began to change. It was like a game of whispers, played across thousands of miles. By the time the word reached the ears of scholars in France, England, and Italy, it had gained an extra letter. The Tata became the Tartar. There was a reason for this small, subtle change, and it tells us a lot about how people viewed the unknown in those days. In the classical mythology of the Greeks and Romans, which was very popular among European scholars, there was a place called Tartarus. It was described as a deep, dark abyss, a place of mystery and immense power. To the medieval mind, the vast unexplored lands of the East felt just as mysterious and formidable. By adding that single letter R, they linked the people of the steppe to the legends of the deep abyss. It was a linguistic pun, a way for people far away to make sense of a world they didn't yet fully understand. It is interesting to think that the people living in what we call Tartary rarely use that name for themselves. They were a diverse group of cultures, languages, and traditions. They called themselves Mongols, or Turks, or by the names of their specific tribes and clans. To them, the land was simply home, a place of grazing lands, rivers, and sky. The name Tartary was a label placed upon them by outsiders, a general term used to describe a part of the map that remained, for a long time, a great blank space in the European imagination. As you lie there, think about how words can travel and transform. Imagine a scribe in a quiet, candlelit room dipping a quill into a well of dark ink. He is writing the word Tartaria on a sheet of thick parchment. He has never seen the steppe. He has never felt the wind. We were just imagining. He is simply repeating a name that has been passed down through books and stories. The name carries the weight of history, but it is also a bit of a ghost, a word that describes a place from the perspective of someone standing on the outside, looking in. This is the nature of the mystery we are exploring. The maps of the 1780s were the peak of this naming tradition. By then, Grand Tartary was a standard term, printed in elegant flowing script across the center of Asia. It was a convenient way to talk about a massive, complex region without having to know every detail of its internal borders. It was a name that provided comfort through its simplicity, even if it didn't quite capture the reality of the people who lived there. Feel the weight of that history, but let it be a light weight. Like a soft blanket, it covers the past in a way that is familiar and safe. The word Tartar is just a sound, a breath of air shaped by the tongue. Let that sound drift away now. You don't need to remember the dates or the linguistic shifts. Just know that the world is full of these quiet layers, and we are gently peeling them back to find the peace underneath. The Tata people, the scholars in their libraries, the rolling R of the abyss, they are all just parts of a long, slow story that is leading you toward sleep. The parchment is old, the ink is dry, and the mystery is as soft as the shadows in your room. Take another breath, slow and deep, as we move from the origins of the name into the great empires that once flourished under it. The history is steady, and you are perfectly safe within its embrace. To understand why Tartary remained on the maps for so long, we must look back at the long shadow cast by one of the largest empires the world has ever known. Centuries before the 1780s, the Mongol Empire had woven together a tapestry of lead that stretched across the entire heart of Asia. It was a time of immense movement, a pulse of history that connected the East to the West in a way that had never been seen before. But as time flowed on like a slow-moving river, that great unity began to change its shape, softening at the edges and settling into something new. The part of this empire that touched the borders of Europe was often called the Golden Horde. It is a name that evokes the image of a sun setting over a vast, golden sea of grass, the light reflecting off the silk of tents and the polished metal of shields. The Golden Horde was not just a singular force. It was a civilization of cities, trade routes, and complex laws that governed millions of people. Yet, as the sun eventually sets on every great era, the Golden Horde began to fragment. It didn't disappear all at once. Instead, it divided, like a great mountain range weathering into individual peaks. Think of a large ancient tree. Its trunk is solid and singular near the ground, but as you look higher, it splits into many branches, each reaching out in its own direction toward the sky. These branches were the khanates, smaller states that carried on the traditions of the empire but functioned as independent worlds. There was the Khanate of Kazan, the Khanate of Astrakhan, the Khanate of Crimea, and the vast snowy reaches of the Khanate of Sibir. To the people living within these borders, the world was specific and personal. They knew their neighbors, their local leaders, and the specific bend of the river where they watered their animals. They didn't see themselves as part of a vague or mysterious Tartary. They saw themselves as citizens of their own unique lands with their own stories and songs. But to a traveler or a geographer, thousands of miles away in London or Paris, these distinctions often felt distant and overlapping. The Europeans used the word Tartary as a collective term, a convenient way to group these many khanates under one banner. It was simpler for them to imagine a single, vast region than to keep track of the shifting borders and the changing names of every smaller state. In their minds, Tartary was the political reality of the East, a collection of fragments left behind by the Mongol legacy, held together by a shared history and a common way of life on the steppe. On the old maps we are imagining, you might see these khanates labeled in smaller, delicate letters, tucked away in the corners of the Grand Tartary. They were like the different rooms of a great, sprawling house. Each room had its own character and its own purpose. yet all were contained within the same sturdy walls in the eyes of the map maker. This is why the name persisted for so long. It wasn't just a geographical error. It was a way of making sense of a complex, changing world by using a familiar, ancient label that everyone understood. As you listen, imagine these lands as they were, quiet, open, and filled with the soft sounds of the wind moving through the tall grass. The political borders were just lines on a map, but the land itself remained constant and indifferent to the names people gave it. The horses grazed, the seasonal migrations continued, and the stars watched over the Conaties just as they watch over us tonight. The great Mongol legacy had transformed into a mosaic of cultures, a quiet patchwork of history that would eventually lead to the changes we see as we approach the end of the 18th century. Let the idea of these many branches and fragments bring you a sense of peace. The world is large, and it has room for many stories, many names, and many quiet corners. You don't need to hold on to the complexity of the history. Just feel the vastness of the space we are describing, the stillness of the steppe, and the steady, slow passage of time that turns empires into memories, and memories into the soft ink on a beautiful, aged map. Everything is unfolding as it should, and you are simply drifting along with the current of time. If we move our eyes downward on those 18th century maps, away from the endless, grassy horizons of the north, we find ourselves at the southern edge of this vast territory. Here, the land begins to narrow, reaching out like a hand into the deep, dark blue of the Black Sea. This was the Khanate of Crimea, often labeled on European maps as Little Tartary or Crim Tartary. It was a place where the world of the nomadic steppe met the world of the ancient sea, a beautiful crossroads where the air smelled of salt and wild thyme. Imagine standing on a high cliff overlooking the water. The sun is setting, painting the sky in shades of soft lavender and gold. Below you, the waves of the Black Sea roll in with a slow, rhythmic pulse. Listen to the sound of the water as it meets the shore, a gentle, repetitive shushing that seems to sync with your own quiet breathing in and out. The tide comes in and the tide goes out. The Khanate of Crimea was perhaps the most sophisticated and enduring of all the fragments left behind by the Golden Horde. While the northern regions were defined by the movement of herds and the vastness of the plains, Crimea was a land of settled gardens, white stone palaces, and bustling ports. It was a jewel in the crown of what the West called Tartary. The rulers here, the Jireh Khans, built a capital at Bakhchisarai, a name that translates beautifully to the Palace of Gardens. Picture a quiet courtyard within that palace at night. The air is cool and still. You can hear the faint musical trickle of a fountain, the famous Fountain of Tears, where water drops slowly, one by one, into a marble basin. The sound is delicate, like a heartbeat, echoing softly against the carved stone walls. High above, the same stars that shone over the Gobi Desert shine here, reflected in the dark, still pools of the palace gardens. For centuries, this southern reach of Tartary was a place of incredible blending. You would find merchants from Venice and Genoa trading silk and spices in the ports, while just a few miles inland, the traditional life of the horsemen continued on the open plains. It was a world where the rugged spirit of the East met the refined grace of the Mediterranean. On the old maps, this area was drawn with great detail, showing the jagged coastline and the many small towns that clung to the hillsides. As you drift deeper into relaxation, imagine the peace of this coastal landscape. The wind travels across the sea carrying a cool mist that settles over the vineyards and the ancient ruins. There is no rush here. The history of this place is long and layered like the sediment at the bottom of the sea, but tonight all that matters is the stillness. The Khanate of Crimea was a bridge between worlds, a place where the name Tartary felt less like a vague label and more like a living, breathing reality of culture and trade. Feel the weight of your body pressing gently into your bed, much like the peninsula rests upon the sea. There is a sense of being anchored, of being safe and held by the earth. The little Tartary of the south was a land of beauty and sanctuary. And as we look at it through the lens of history, we see a place that was vibrant and full of life before the borders began to shift and the names began to change. For now, just let the sound of the imaginary waves wash over you, clearing away the thoughts of the day, leaving only the quiet, moonlit beauty of the southern shore. The water is calm, the gardens are silent, and the world is at peace. Leaving the southern gardens of Crimea, our journey through the maps of the past takes us north and east, following the winding silver path of the great Volga River. As we travel up this ancient waterway, the air becomes crisper, scented with the deep, earthy aroma of pine needles and damp soil. We are entering the heart of what was once the Khanate of Kazan, another vital piece of the vast puzzle that Europeans simply called Tartary. Imagine the city of Kazan as it might have appeared centuries ago, perched on the high banks where the Kazanka River meets the Volga. In the 16th century, this was a place of incredible convergence. It was a fortress of white stone, where the sounds of the morning calls to prayer drifted over bustling marketplaces filled with furs from the north and silks from the south. The atmosphere here was one of transition, a gateway between the forests of the Rus and the open plains of the east. In the year 1552, a significant change began to unfold, a change that marks the very first step in the vanishing of Tartary from our maps. It was during this time that the Russian Empire, under the reign of Ivan IV, began its steady expansion eastward. When Kazan was absorbed into the Russian state, it wasn't just a change of governance. It was the beginning of a long, slow process of cultural and cartographic blending. As you lie there, feeling the quiet stillness of the night, imagine this process not as a sudden storm, but as the slow turning of the seasons. Just as summer fades into autumn, the independent khanates of the steppe began to merge into the administrative fabric of the growing empire. On the maps of the time, the bold, sweeping letters of Tartaria were slowly being replaced by the structured provinces of Russia. This was the first place where the name started to dissolve, like sugar in tea, leaving behind a new flavor, a new identity. The blending of cultures in Kazan was a quiet, enduring legacy. You can see it even today in the architecture of the city, where the elegant minarets of the mosques stand in harmony with the golden onion-shaped domes of the cathedrals. It is a place where two worlds learn to live side by side, sharing the same rivers, the same winters, and the same starlit skies. The people who lived there, the Tatars and the Russians, began to weave their stories together, creating a tapestry that was richer and more complex than the simple labels on a map could ever suggest. Take a deep, slow breath and feel the calm of this historical transition. There is a profound peace in understanding that the disappearance of a name is often just the beginning of a new story. The Khanate of Kazan didn't simply vanish, it transformed. It became a bridge, a place where the mystery of the East met the structure of the West. As the border shifted, the cartographers in distant European cities had to reconsider their drawings. They began to realize that the land they called Tartary was far more diverse and organized than they had previously imagined. The vast empty spaces on their parchment were being filled with the names of real cities, real rivers, and real people. The great Tartary of the imagination was slowly being replaced by the reality of a changing world. Listen to the imagined sound of the Volga as it flows steadily northward. The water is deep and dark, carrying the reflections of the moon through the quiet forests. There is no rush in the river's movement, just as there was no rush in the slow unfolding of history. Everything moves in its own time, according to its own rhythm. The absorption of Kazan was the first chapter in this long story of change. It set the stage for the explorers and map makers who would eventually push even further into the unknown, moving past the Volga and toward the great silent expanse of the Ural Mountains. For now, let yourself drift on the current of this peaceful history. The world is changing. The maps are being redrawn, and you are safe, warm, and resting deeply in the quiet of the present moment. The legacy of Kazan is one of endurance and blending, a reminder that even when names fade, the spirit of a place remains, held forever in the layers of the earth and the memory of the wind. Beyond the gentle, rolling peaks of the Ural Mountains, the landscape opens into a realm of immense silence and breathtaking scale. This was the heart of the Khanate of Sibir, a sovereign land that would eventually lend its name to one of the most famous geographical regions on Earth. It is here, in the transition from the 16th to the 18th century, that we find the linguistic seeds of change. The word Siberia did not appear out of thin air. It grew from the roots of this ancient Khanate, centered around its capital, a fortress city known as Siber or Kashlik, nestled near the banks of the Irtysh River. As we look back at the maps of the 1780s, we can see the ink of the past beginning to fade. Where older scrolls once draped the words Grand Tartary across the entire northern horizon, newer charts began to favor the more specific term, Siberia. It was a slow, deliberate process, much like the freezing of a great lake. At first, the name Siberia referred only to the small area around the Khanate itself. But as explorers pushed further into the rising sun, the name expanded, stretching its cold silver fingers across the continent. Imagine, for a moment, the landscape of this region as it was then, and as much of it remains today. It is the world of the taiga, the largest terrestrial biome on our planet. Picture an endless sea of green and white. In the summer, the air is thick with the scent of pine resin and damp earth. In the winter, which lasts for so much of the year, the world is transformed into a sanctuary of crystalline stillness. The taiga is a forest of giants, larch, spruce, and fir trees standing shoulder to shoulder, their branches laden with a heavy, muffling blanket of snow. In this vast wilderness, the silence is a physical presence. It is a quiet so deep that you can almost hear the soft, rhythmic falling of snowflakes as they land on the frozen ground. There is no rush here. The rivers, like the Ob and the Yenisei, move with a slow, powerful dignity under sheets of ice. For the people living in the Khanate of Sibir, and later for those who mapped it, this land was a place of endurance and profound peace. The transition from the name Tartary to Siberia was more than just a change in political borders. It was a shift in how the world was perceived. Tartary was a word of the old world, a word that spoke of vast, mysterious empires and nomadic legends. Siberia was a word of the new world, a name rooted in the specific soil, the specific forts, and the specific rivers of the north. As the Russian Empire integrated these lands, the administrative clarity of Siberia began to overwrite the poetic vagueness of Tartary. The map makers in Europe, sitting in their quiet studies with their quills and compasses, began to follow suit. They were seeking a new kind of accuracy, a way to categorize the earth that felt ordered and scientific. The great Tartary of their grandfathers' maps was being broken down into manageable provinces. The name Sibir, once the title of a single Khanate, was becoming the identity of a third of the continent. As you settle deeper into your pillows, imagine the cool, fresh air of the Siberian night. The sky is a deep, velvety indigo, crowded with stars that seem to shine with a special clarity over the snowy plains. The vanishing of Tartary in this region wasn't a loss, but a focusing of the lens. It was the moment the world began to see the taiga for what it truly was, a place of infinite quiet, a place where the trees and the snow tell a story that doesn't need a map to be understood. The old name was drifting away, like a soft mist lifting at dawn, revealing the solid, enduring reality of the land beneath. Let out a long, soft sigh now, releasing any tension that might still be lingering in your shoulders, your neck, or your jaw. Feel the weight of your body as it sinks just a little deeper into the mattress, perfectly supported and completely safe. In this quiet space, there is nowhere else you need to be and no tasks that require your attention. You are simply here, drifting through the calm, quiet corridors of history, where the air is still and the light is soft. Imagine, for a moment, that the warmth of your bed is like a protective cocoon, shielding you from the crisp, cool air of that distant northern forest we just visited. Picture the taiga at night, resting under the silver glow of a high, pale moon. The snow is so deep and so pure that it seems to radiate its own gentle light, illuminating the dark, sturdy trunks of the pines and the delicate frosted needles of the fir trees. Everything is perfectly still. There is no wind to stir the heavy branches, no sound to break the profound peace of the wilderness. In this forest, the passage of time feels different. It doesn't move in minutes or hours, but in the slow, rhythmic growth of a tree or the gradual, silent accumulation of snowflakes. This is the same stillness that once covered the vast lands of the north, the same quiet that the map makers of old tried to capture with their quills and parchment. As you breathe in, imagine that cool, clean air, scented with the faint, sharp aroma of frozen wood and the deep, earthy scent of ancient moss. And as you breathe out, feel the warmth of your room, the softness of your pillow, and the heavy, comforting presence of your blankets. You are like a traveler who has found a sturdy, warm cabin in the middle of a vast, snowy plain. Outside, the world is wide and mysterious, filled with names that change and borders that shift like the shadows of clouds. But inside, it is warm and secure. The fire in the hearth is a low orange glow, casting soft, flickering shadows against the wooden walls. You are safe. You are tucked away from the cold, watching the history of the world unfold from a place of absolute, undisturbed rest. Think of the snow again. It covers the old paths, the old markers, and the old names of the land. It creates a blank canvas, a quiet space where the mind can truly rest. The vanishing of Tartary in these regions was not a sudden disappearance into nothingness, but a gentle fading, much like the way the edges of a dream begin to soften as you drift into a deeper, more peaceful sleep. It is a natural part of the world's rhythm, the old making way for the new, the vague becoming clear, and the loud becoming quiet. Allow your thoughts to be as light as a single snowflake, drifting slowly down through the dark, silent branches of a Siberian larch. It doesn't struggle. It doesn't hurry. It simply follows the gentle pull of the earth until it finds its place among the millions of others, contributing to the great, silent blanket that covers the world. Your breath is like that snowflake, steady, natural, and peaceful. With every inhale, you draw in the quiet of the forest. With every exhale, you let go of the day, moving further away from the noise of the modern world and closer to the timeless, snowy landscape of the past. The maps may change, and the names of empires may be forgotten, but the peace of the night remains the same, century after century. Rest here in this stillness for a while. Let the image of the moonlit snow fill your mind with its cool, calming light. Our journey through the 18th century is a slow one, and there is plenty of time to explore the reasons why the world began to look different to those who lived so long ago. For now, there is only the warmth, the quiet, and the gentle rhythm of your heart, beating in time with the resting world. As we sit by that quiet, flickering hearth in our minds, the world outside is changing in a very specific way. In the late 1700s, a new spirit was moving through the libraries, universities, and royal courts of Europe. It was a period we now call the Enlightenment, or the Age of Reason. It was a time when the human mind sought to bring light to every dark corner of the globe, to replace folklore with fact and mystery with measurement. Imagine a room filled with the soft, rhythmic ticking of a grandfather clock and the faint, sweet scent of beeswax candles. A cartographer sits at a heavy oak desk, his eyes narrowed as he peers through a magnifying glass at a copper plate engraving. Before this era, a map was often as much a work of art as it was a tool. Map makers would fill large, unknown spaces with illustrations of mythical creatures, ornate crests, or broad, sweeping names like Grand Tartary. These names were like comfortable blankets. They covered vast areas that hadn't been fully explored, giving the viewer a general sense of the other without needing to provide the fine details. But in the 1780s, a shift began to occur. This was the birth of what we call scientific geography. To the thinkers of the Enlightenment, vagueness was no longer acceptable. They believed that the world was a giant, intricate machine that could be understood through mathematics and observation. They wanted to know exactly where a river turned, exactly how high a mountain peaked, and exactly where the border of one kingdom touched another. Think of the tools they used: the sextant, the octant, and the newly perfected marine chronometer. These instruments allowed explorers to fix their position on the Earth by looking at the stars with a precision never before seen. As these explorers returned with their notebooks full of coordinates and degrees, the old maps began to look like beautiful but inaccurate relics of a simpler time. The term Tartary started to feel too large, too imprecise for this new orderly world. It was a word that described a people and a culture, but it didn't describe the land in the way a scientist would. The cartographers of the 1780s began to demand geographical certainty. They wanted sharp, thin lines instead of soft, blurred edges. They were like gardeners tidying a wild, overgrown landscape, pulling back the vines of tradition to reveal the solid stone of reality beneath. When they looked at the area labeled Tartary, they didn't see one giant, mysterious empire. They saw a collection of diverse landscapes, distinct mountain ranges, and specific political territories that needed their own individual names. This desire for precision was not just about science. It was about order. There is a deep, quiet satisfaction in putting things in their proper place, in labeling a drawer or organizing a shelf. The map makers of this era felt that same urge on a global scale. They were trying to organize the world, to make it readable and predictable. As they drew their new, more accurate lines, the broad, poetic label of Tartary began to thin out. It started to fade, not because the land had changed, but because the way humans chose to see the land had evolved. As you lie there, feel the calm of that order. Imagine the world being mapped out with such care and such quiet, steady hands. Every line is drawn with intention. Every name is placed with purpose. The world is becoming a place where everything has a specific location, a specific identity. It is a transition from the beautiful fog of the unknown into the clear, cool light of understanding. And as this light grew brighter, the vast, shadowy name of Tartary began its slow, graceful retreat from the pages of history. As we watch the broad, poetic label of Tartary begin to thin out, we see the steady hand of one of history's most influential figures guiding the pen. To understand why this name began to dissolve, we must look toward the cold, vast horizons of the North and the West, where the Russian Empire was beginning to stretch its limbs. In the late 18th century, the empire was ruled by Catherine the Great, a woman of sharp intellect who saw herself as a child of the Enlightenment. She did not want to rule over a mysterious, vaguely defined wilderness. She wanted a modern, organized state that could stand as an equal to any in Europe. Under her gaze, the wild, unmapped expanses of what the world called Tartary began to be brought into the light of administrative order. Imagine Catherine in her study, the soft glow of candlelight reflecting off the gold leaf of her instruments. She sent out great expeditions, teams of surveyors and scientists equipped with the latest tools of measurement. These men traveled across the endless steppes and through the deep, silent forests of the taiga. They weren't just exploring, they were redefining. They were measuring the distance between rivers and the height of mountain passes with a rhythmic, quiet persistence. With every step they took, the old sweeping name of Tartary was being replaced by something more specific, more grounded in the reality of the state. The Russian government began a process of systematic mapping that was as much about language as it was about geography. They divided the vast territories into gubernias, or administrative provinces. Places that had once been labeled on European maps as Little Tartary or Great Tartary were suddenly given new official titles, like the province of Tobolsk, the province of Irkutsk, or the Taurida Governorate. These names felt solid. They felt permanent. They represented the quiet, steady hand of a government claiming the land not just in person, but on paper. As you settle deeper into your pillow, imagine the sound of a quill moving across a fresh sheet of parchment. It is a soft, scratching sound, repetitive and calming. Each stroke of the pen is drawing a new border, a new boundary that encloses a piece of the world. In the archives of St. Petersburg, the old maps were being tucked away into drawers, and new, crisper maps were being unrolled. On these new maps, the word Tartary didn't just disappear all at once. It began to shrink, relegated to smaller and smaller fonts, until it was nothing more than a historical footnote. The Russian Empire's role in this was like a slow rising tide. It didn't wash the name away with a crash. It simply flowed over it, covering the old ways of speaking with a new standardized language. The Tatars who lived there were still there, of course, their cultures and traditions as vibrant as ever. But in the eyes of the world's map makers, they were now subjects of a specific province within a specific empire. The mystery of the Tartar lands was being replaced by the order of the Russian state. Feel the weight of that history, a slow and heavy transition that took decades to complete. It is the feeling of a world becoming more defined, more certain. The vast open spaces are being tucked into neat, manageable folders. And as the Russian Empire consolidated its hold on the northern and western reaches of the continent, the name Tartary found itself squeezed, pushed further toward the east and the south, where another great power was watching the same horizon with a very different set of maps. While the Russian Empire was expanding its reach from the west, another great power was quietly and steadily defining the eastern boundaries of what the world once called Tartary. This was the Qing dynasty, a period of immense growth and cultural consolidation for the Chinese Empire. If you imagine the vast map of Asia spread out before you, the name Tartary was being squeezed between two great, slow-moving giants. On the maps of the 1700s, the eastern portion of this vast region was often labeled Chinese Tartary. It was a phrase that captured the mystery of the lands beyond the Great Wall, lands of rolling grasslands, dense forests, and high, cold plateaus. But to the emperors of the Qing dynasty, these were not just vague territories on a distant map. They were the ancestral homelands of the Manchu people and the strategic territories of the Mongol tribes. Take a slow, deep breath and imagine the quiet of a high mountain pass in the east. The air is thin and crisp, and the only sound is the soft rustle of the wind through the dry grass. Here, the Qing dynasty was performing its own version of the cartographic shift we saw in the West, As the empire grew, it brought these regions under a more centralized, structured administration. The term Chinese Tartary began to feel less and less accurate to the geographers of the time. In its place, more specific and descriptive names began to emerge on the maps sent back to Europe. The northern lands, the birthplace of the Qing rulers themselves, began to be known as Manchuria. To the west of that, the vast open steppes became Mongolia. These weren't just new names. They were a recognition of the distinct peoples and political realities of the region. The vanishing of Tartary in the east was a process of refinement. The vague collective label was being peeled away layer by layer to reveal the complex tapestry of cultures underneath. European map makers, who had once used Tartary as a convenient shorthand for everything they didn't fully understand about the interior of Asia, were now receiving more detailed reports. They learned of the banner system of the Manchus and the intricate alliances of the Mongol princes. As you drift further toward sleep, visualize the delicate brushwork of a Qing-era map. Instead of the bold, sweeping letters of Grand Tartary, you see fine, elegant characters marking the boundaries of provinces and the locations of military outposts. The ink is dark and precise, capturing the reality of an empire that was carefully documenting its own borders. This shift in naming was not just about politics. It was about the world becoming a smaller, more known place. The unknown was being charted, measured, and named. The vastness of Chinese Tartary was being broken down into smaller, more manageable pieces: Manchuria, Mongolia, and the western regions of Xinjiang. The name Tartary was losing its place on the eastern side of the continent, just as it had in the west. It is a peaceful thought, the idea of the world becoming clearer, more defined. The shadows on the map are being chased away by the steady light of discovery and administration. The great expanse that once felt so mysterious was now being understood in its own right, with its own names and its own stories. And so, by the late 18th century, the word Tartary was caught in a pincer movement. To the north and west, the Russians were renaming the land. To the east and south, the Qing were doing the same. The name was retreating into the high, central heart of the continent, the most remote and inaccessible part of the world. Here, in the rugged mountains and deep deserts of Central Asia, the last vestiges of Tartary would linger for a little while longer, becoming the focus of a new kind of attention. This new attention was born from the strategic interests of two distant powers, and it would eventually lead to the final removal of Tartary from the global lexicon. Historians often call this period the Great Game, a quiet, long-term shadow dance between the British Empire moving upward from the sun-drenched plains of India and the Russian Empire, steadily expanding downward from the north. These two powers were converging on the high, rugged heart of Central Asia, a place that mapmakers had once been content to leave as a vast, sandy void. But in this new era of empires, a vague name like Tartary was no longer sufficient. For a general planning a route or a diplomat negotiating a border, a label that covered thousands of miles of diverse terrain was practically useless. They needed to know exactly where one valley ended and another began. They needed to know the precise locations of mountain passes, the depth of rivers, and the exact boundaries of the local conaties. The vague geography of the past was being replaced by the cold, hard necessity of strategic mapping. Imagine a lone traveler, perhaps an officer or a surveyor in disguise, moving through the high, thin air of the Pamir Mountains. In the silence of the peaks, the only sound is the crunch of boots on dry earth and the distant whistle of the wind. These explorers were often part of a secret effort to chart the unknown lands. The British employed pundits, specially trained Indian surveyors who traveled thousands of miles on foot, counting their paces with prayer beads and hiding their compasses in traditional walking sticks. Their mission was to turn the great Tartary of the old maps into a series of precise mathematical coordinates. As these secret surveys were compiled into official documents, the old romantic name began to dissolve. It was replaced by more specific, localized terms that reflected the political reality on the ground. What was once independent Tartary was now being meticulously divided into regions like Turkestan, the Emirate of Bukhara, and the Khanate of Khiva. These were real places with real rulers, and the empires of the 19th century needed to treat them as such. This shift was driven by a need for control and predictability. In a world of steamships and telegraphs, there was no room for the unknown. Every mountain range had to be named. Every desert had to be measured. The Tartary of the 1700s had been a land of mystery and legend, a place where map makers could place mythical creatures or vast, undefined kingdoms. But by the mid-1800s, the light of modern cartography was shining into every corner of the continent. The Great Game ensured that geography was no longer just an academic pursuit, it was a matter of national survival. As the British and Russians drew their lines in the sand, the blanket term Tartary simply fell away, unable to withstand the pressure of such intense scrutiny. It was a casualty of the transition from the age of discovery to the age of administration. The name Tartary was no longer a tool for discovery. It was a relic of a time when the world felt much larger and much less known. This administrative shift wasn't just happening on maps carried by soldiers and spies, it was being recorded in the very books that defined the world's knowledge at the time. To understand how the name Tartary truly began to fade from the collective consciousness, we can look to the great archives of the late 18th century. Imagine, if you will, a quiet library, the air thick with the scent of old paper and beeswax. You are standing before a shelf of heavy leather-bound volumes. This is the second edition of the Encyclopedia Britannica, printed between 1777 and 1784. As you carefully lift one of these massive books, you feel the weight of centuries of accumulated thought. The leather is cool and slightly textured under your fingertips. When you open it, the thick, cream-colored pages make a soft, rhythmic sound, like a gentle sigh. The typography is elegant, with long, sweeping letters and deep black ink that has survived the passage of hundreds of years. You turn to the section under the letter T, searching for that elusive name. In this edition, Tartary is still very much a presence. It is described as a vast country in the northern parts of Asia, bounded by Siberia on the north and the Chinese Empire on the south. But as you read the fine print, you notice something fascinating. Even in 1780, the scholars of the Enlightenment were beginning to struggle with the term. They were no longer satisfied with the vague, sweeping generalizations of the past. The encyclopedia notes that this country is divided into several parts, each with its own distinct character: Russian Tartary, Chinese Tartary, and independent Tartary. The language is subtly shifting. While the word Tartary is used as a header, the descriptions underneath focus more on the various peoples who inhabit the land. The authors describe the different tribes, their customs, their nomadic lifestyles, and their unique languages. They are beginning to see the region not as a single, unified political entity, but as a diverse tapestry of human experience. The word Tartary was starting to function less like the name of a country, such as France or England, and more like a broad geographic label, similar to how we might use the term the Midwest or the Sahara today. In earlier editions, particularly the very first one from 1771, the definition was even more expansive, often referring to it as one of the greatest empires in the world. But by 1780, the tone had become more analytical, more cautious. The writers were beginning to recognize that the Grand Tartary of the old maps was a simplification that no longer fit the growing body of scientific data. They were documenting a transition. The country was becoming a region, and the Tartars were being recognized as a multitude of different ethnic groups: the Manchus, the Mongols, the Kyrgyz, and the Kalmyks. As you trace the lines of text with your finger, you can see the name Tartary beginning to lose its solid edges. It is as if the scholars were trying to pin down a cloud. The more they learned about the specific cultures and the actual political boundaries of the Russian and Chinese empires, the less they needed the umbrella term. The encyclopedia was reflecting a world that was becoming more defined, more categorized, and more fragmented into specific, recognizable parts. The 1780 Encyclopedia Britannica stands as a bridge between two worlds. It captures the moment when the romantic, mysterious Tartary of the Renaissance was being replaced by the rigorous, scientific geography of the modern era. The name was still there, printed in bold ink, but its meaning was dissolving. It was a word in the process of becoming a ghost, a remnant of an older way of seeing the world that couldn't survive the scrutiny of the new age. The silence of the library surrounds you, and as you close the heavy book, the soft thud of the cover feels like a quiet conclusion to an era of mystery. The world was being mapped, named, and understood one page at a time, and in that process, the vast shadowy name of Tartary was slowly being written out of the story. As the echo of the heavy book cover closing fades into the profound stillness of the library, let yourself settle even deeper into the quiet of this moment. The transition from those old ink-stained pages back to the present is like waking from a very long, very peaceful dream. Imagine the dust motes dancing in a single beam of afternoon light that stretches across the wooden floor. They move with no particular destination, drifting in a slow, rhythmic ballet, mirroring the way your thoughts might be drifting now. Feel the weight of your shoulders dropping away from your ears. Notice the sensation of your limbs becoming heavy and yet, paradoxically, light, as if you were floating on the surface of a calm, dark lake under a canopy of stars. There is a gentle weightlessness in letting go of the need to solve every puzzle or map every border. The name Tartary, once so vast and imposing, is now just a soft whisper in the corridors of time, a ghost that doesn't haunt, but merely rests. Take a slow, intentional breath in, feeling the cool air fill your lungs. And as you exhale, imagine releasing any lingering tension from the day. You're in a space of complete safety. The world is large, yes, but it is also known. There is a deep, resonant peace in the realization that the great mysteries of the past are held in the careful hands of history. The maps have been drawn, the mountains have been measured, and the rivers have been traced to their sources. You don't have to navigate any difficult terrain tonight. You are simply a passenger on a slow-moving ship, drifting through the quietest parts of the world's story. Think about the concept of time as a wide, slow-moving river. It carries the names of empires and the memories of travelers as along its current, eventually smoothing the edges of every sharp border and every loud claim of ownership. In this river, the 1780s are just a gentle bend in the water. We are floating past that bend now, leaving the dusty libraries and the heavy encyclopedias behind. As you lie there, let the rhythm of your breathing become the only map you need. Each inhale is a new territory of calm. Each exhale is a vast, open step of relaxation. The silence that follows the closing of the book is a gift, a blank space on a map where nothing is required of you. There are no cities to name, no tribes to categorize, and no histories to reconcile. There is only the stillness, the warmth of your blankets, and the soft, steady pulse of the world at rest. The vastness of the Asian continent, once labeled with that singular, mysterious word, is now just a quiet landscape, sleeping under the moonlight. The great steppes are silent. The mountain passes are filled with shadows, and the ancient paths are overgrown with the peace of centuries. You are part of that peace. You are as much a part of the world's map as the mountains and the seas. And right now, your only task is to exist in this beautiful, unhurried stillness. Let your mind soften like ink dipping into water, spreading out until it is thin and translucent. The sharp lines of the old maps are blurring now, becoming a soft gray mist that feels cool and comforting. The world is explored. The world is known. And because it is known, it is safe to let go and simply drift into the quiet. The names may change and the ink may fade, but the earth remains beneath us, steady and supportive, holding us as we drift toward sleep. As we drift further into the quiet of the past, we can begin to see how the world's attention shifted, much like the tide pulling away from a familiar shore. For hundreds of years, the heart of the great continent was the world's most vibrant highway. We often call it the Silk Road, though it was never just one road. It was a delicate, shifting web of paths that connected east to west, carrying not just silk, but spices, stories, and the quiet, steady rhythm of camel caravans crossing the high mountain passes. In those days, the lands of Tartary were central to the story of the world. They were the bridge that everyone had to cross. But as the 1700s progressed, a great change began to unfold. A change that was as silent and inevitable as the turning of the seasons. The world was looking toward the sea. Imagine the great wooden ships of the era, their white sails catching the wind like the wings of giant birds. These ships were becoming larger, faster, and more capable of navigating the vast, deep blue of the Atlantic and Indian Oceans. Merchants realized that they could carry more goods in a single hull than 1,000 camels could carry across the desert. They could bypass the mountains, the dusty plains, and the complex networks of the interior entirely. As the trade routes moved to the coastlines, the interior of Asia began to recede from the daily thoughts of the Western world. It was no longer the bustling center of global commerce. It became a quiet, distant interior. In the world of cartography, maps often follow the money and the movement of people. When the great ports of Canton, Calcutta, and Nagasaki became the new centers of focus, the map makers turned their attention to the intricate details of coastlines, reefs, and harbor depths. The vast steppes of the interior, once so vital, began to feel like a mystery again. Not a frightening mystery, but a peaceful, forgotten one. Think of it like a garden path that was once used every day. When people walk a path, the earth stays bare and the borders are clear. But when people stop walking there, the grass begins to grow back, the wildflowers bloom over the stones, and the sharp edges of the path begin to soften and blur. This is what happened to the name Tartary. Because Europeans were no longer traveling through the heart of the continent as frequently, the old broad label of Tartary stayed on the maps like a faded signpost on an unused road. It was a placeholder, a word used for a place that was no longer at the center of the conversation. By the time the late 18th century arrived, the maps were ready for a renewal. When interest finally returned to the interior, it wasn't driven by merchants looking for silk, but by scientists and empires looking for precision. They didn't want the old poetic labels of the past. They wanted to measure the world as it truly was. And so, the vague romantic Tartary began to dissolve, replaced by the specific grounded names of provinces, mountains, and rivers that we recognize today. The name didn't vanish in a moment of conflict. It simply drifted away like a cloud dispersing in the morning sun. It was a natural evolution of a world becoming more connected by water than by land. As you lie there, imagine those old silk roots, now silent, covered by the gentle scents and the swaying grasses of the steppe. The world is quiet there now. The caravans have long since found their rest, and the great ships have found their harbors. Everything is in its right place, and the maps have been redrawn to reflect a world that is understood, measured, and deeply, profoundly still. Take a slow breath and feel the weight of that stillness, knowing that even when names fade, the earth remains, constant and peaceful beneath the steers. Sometimes, when we look back at these old maps and see a name like Grand Tartary stretching across so much space, our modern minds try to fill in the blanks with stories. It is human nature to seek out mystery where there is silence. And in recent years, a new kind of folklore has emerged, a story of a grand lost civilization and a sudden physical catastrophe. You may have heard whispers of a mud flood, a theory that suggests a great empire was wiped away and its cities buried deep in the earth, leaving only the tops of grand buildings visible as basement windows in our modern cities. It is a compelling image, like something out of a dream, ancient, majestic structures half sunken into the ground, their true history hidden away by the passage of time. But as we drift closer to the truth, we find something much more grounded and, in its own way, much more comforting. When we see those older buildings with windows sitting right at the level of the sidewalk, we aren't seeing the remnants of a forgotten disaster. We are seeing the practical, thoughtful choices of architects from long ago. In the 1800s, it was very common to build what were called raised basements. These were designed to keep the main living quarters high and dry, away from the dust and dampness of the unpaved streets, while allowing light and air to reach the kitchens and service rooms tucked just below the surface. As cities grew and modernized, the streets were often raised and leveled to make way for sewers and cobblestones, making those lower windows seem even closer to the ground. The disappearance of Tartary wasn't a physical erasing of a people or a sudden violent end to a civilization. There was no great flood of earth that swallowed the cities of the steppe. Instead, the change was much quieter. It was a linguistic and political transition. The people who lived in those vast lands, the Tatars, the Mongols, the Uzbeks, and many others, didn't vanish. They simply began to be recognized by their own specific names, rather than the broad, sweeping label used by map makers in distant Europe. The mystery of the missing empire is really just the story of how our knowledge of the world became more precise. There is a deep, profound peace in knowing that the world is stable. You can rest easily knowing that the ground beneath us hasn't shifted in a sudden, frightening way, but has stayed firm and constant for centuries. History is rarely a series of explosions. It is more like a slow, steady river carving its path through the landscape over a long, long time. The story of Tartary is one of growth and of the world becoming more clearly defined, one map at a time. It is a story of how we name the places we share and how those names evolve as we learn to see one another more clearly. As you lie there, feel the weight of that stability. The earth is solid, the history is recorded, and the world is exactly as it should be. We don't need to fear hidden catastrophes or lost timelines. The truth is much more restful. The world is a place that we have spent centuries learning to understand, and every old map is just a stepping stone on that journey toward clarity. Take a slow, deep breath and let the comfort of factual history wrap around you like a heavy, warm quilt. The world is at rest, and so are you. Everything is documented, everything is known, and everything is quiet. As the 18th century gave way to the 19th, the way we spoke about the world began to change. The maps were no longer just pieces of art. They were becoming tools of precision. The colorful, sweeping labels like Grand Tartary started to feel a bit too vague for the scientists and explorers of this new era. They wanted words that described the land itself, its mountains, its climate, and its exact coordinates on the globe. This was the beginning of what we now call the standardization of language in geography. It was a quiet, orderly process, much like reorganizing a large sunlit library where every book is finally given its proper place on the shelf. One of the most important figures in this transition was a man named Alexander von Humboldt. Imagine him as a gentle, curious soul, a Prussian polymath who spent his life trying to understand how every part of nature is connected to every other part. In 1829, at the age of 60, Humboldt embarked on a great journey across the Russian Empire, traveling all the way to the borders of China. He didn't go looking for myths or lost empires. He went with barometers and thermometers, wanting to measure the pulse of the earth. He looked at the vast landscapes that Europeans had called Tartary for centuries, and he saw something much more complex and beautiful. Humboldt was one of the first to champion a new term, Asia Centrale, or Central Asia. To him, this wasn't just a change in name, but a change in perspective. He wanted to describe the heart of the continent based on its physical reality, the way the high plateaus rose toward the sky, and the way the winds moved across the open plains. By using the term Central Asia, he was stripping away the old, slightly fearful connotations of the word Tartar and replacing them with a name that was grounded in the physical world. It was a name that everyone could agree on, regardless of what language they spoke or what stories they had heard. This shift was part of a larger movement towards scientific geography. During this time, geographers began to realize that using one name for such a massive, diverse area was no longer helpful. They started to break the region down into smaller, more accurate pieces. What was once Chinese Tartary became known as Manchuria and Mongolia. What was independent Tartary began to be mapped as the specific regions we know today, like Turkestan. It was as if a soft light was being turned up in a darkened room, allowing everyone to see the individual details that had always been there, just slightly out of focus. As you listen to the story of these changing names, let your mind rest on the idea of clarity. There is something very soothing about the way we learn to define our world with more and more care. The disappearance of Tartary wasn't a loss, it was an evolution. It was the moment the world decided to look closer, to listen more intently, and to use words that were more respectful of the actual landscape. The vague mystery was replaced by a beautiful, detailed reality. Humboldt's work helped create a common language for all of humanity to share when talking about our home. Instead of the great unknown, we began to speak of the Altai Mountains or the steppes of the Kyrgyz. These names were like anchors, holding the geography steady in our minds. As the old maps were folded away into archives, the new maps took their place, filled with the quiet rhythmic sounds of scientific names and measured distances. Think of this transition as a gentle settling of the dust. The world was becoming more organized, more understood, and more peaceful. The maps were becoming a reflection of our growing knowledge, a testament to our desire to see the world exactly as it is. As you drift closer to sleep, feel the comfort of that precision. The world is mapped, the names are settled, and the landscape is waiting, quiet and still, under the vast, starlit sky. The mystery has faded into the light of understanding, leaving behind a world that is clear, stable, and deeply, profoundly at rest. Everything has its name, everything has its place. And you too are in exactly the right place, safe and warm as the history of the world continues its slow, steady journey. While the ink on the maps was drying and the names were shifting, the people who actually lived in these vast lands continued their lives just as they had for centuries. The word Tartary might have faded from European atlases, but the people it once grouped together remained, each with their own rich, distinct identity. It is helpful to remember that history is not just made of lines on paper. It is made of the living, breathing stories of individuals who call these places home. Think for a moment about the modern Tatars, the descendants of those ancient cultures whose name was once used to describe half the world. They carry forward a legacy of resilience and artistry that has survived through countless generations. Their language and traditions are like a silver thread connecting the past to the present, woven into the very fabric of the landscape. They are a people of music and poetry, and there is something very calming about the thought of their folk songs, which often mimic the rolling rhythm of a horse's gallop or the gentle sway of the grass in the wind. Then there are the Uzbeks, centered in the heart of what was once called independent Tartary. They are the guardians of stunning ancient cities like Samarkand and Bukhara. In these cities, the blue-tiled domes of mosques and madrasas still reach toward the sky, their intricate patterns reflecting the light of the sun and the moon. Imagine the quiet of those courtyards at night, the cool, smooth stone underfoot, and the faint, lingering scent of jasmine and spices in the air. The people here have a deep tradition of craftsmanship, creating silks and ceramics that are as beautiful today as they were hundreds of years ago. Their history is one of trade, knowledge, and a profound appreciation for beauty. Further north, on the endless, open grasslands of the steppe, are the Kazakhs. Their culture is intimately tied to the rhythm of the earth, the movement of the seasons, and the vastness of the horizon. They have a long history as a nomadic people, and even today, that spirit of freedom and connection to nature remains. A central part of their heritage is the yurt, a beautiful, circular home made of wooden lattices and thick felt. The yurt is a masterpiece of design, perfectly suited for the landscape. It is easy to move, yet it provides a sturdy, warm sanctuary against the elements. As you breathe slowly and settle deeper into your pillows, imagine being inside one of those yurts on a quiet night. The walls are lined with colorful, hand-woven carpets that soften every sound. In the center, a small fire might be crackling, providing a gentle warmth that contrasts with the cool, crisp air of the steppe outside. You can hear the soft whistle of the wind as it brushes against the felt, a natural lullaby that has comforted families for 1,000 years. Inside, there is a sense of absolute safety and belonging. The cultures of Central Asia didn't disappear when the maps were redrawn. They simply became more visible to the rest of the world as individual vibrant threads in a massive tapestry. The hospitality of these regions is legendary, a quiet, ingrained respect for the traveler. It is common for a stranger to be offered a warm cup of tea and a piece of fresh bread, a gesture of kindness that transcends language and politics. This human connection is what truly defines a place, far more than the names chosen by a distant cartographer. These people are the living heartbeat of the land once called Tartary. Their daily lives, their celebrations, and their quiet moments of reflection have endured through the rise and fall of empires and the changing of borders. They remind us that while names may change, the essence of a culture is something much deeper and more permanent. It is carried in the way a grandmother tells a story to her grandchild, in the way a craftsman carves a piece of wood, and in the way a community gathers under the wide, open sky to watch the stars. As you drift closer to sleep, let the image of these enduring cultures bring you a sense of peace. The world is not just a collection of facts and figures. It is a home for millions of people who share the same quiet moments of rest and reflection that you are experiencing right now. The steppe is quiet, the cities are still, and the legacy of the past lives on in the gentle, steady pulse of the present. The mystery of the maps has been solved, but the beauty of the people remains constant and true, like the North Star in a clear night sky. Everything is exactly as it should be, and the world is at rest. While the people and their traditions remain the living heart of the land, there is a different kind of beauty preserved in the physical maps themselves, the artifacts that once bore the name Tartary. To look at an original map from the late 18th century is to see more than just a geographical record. It is to witness a labor of immense artistry and patience. Before the era of digital precision and satellite imagery, every line, every mountain range, and every letter was placed by a human hand, guided by a flickering candle and a spirit of discovery. Imagine the texture of the paper used for these grand maps. It is often thick, handmade rag paper, or perhaps fine vellum, with a weight and a presence that modern paper lacks. If you were to run your hand across it very lightly, you might feel the subtle indentations where the copper plate pressed into the fibers, leaving behind the rich, dark ink. The edges are often deckled and soft, slightly frayed by the passage of centuries, carrying the faint, comforting scent of old library shelves, a mix of vanilla, dried wood, and the ghost of ancient dust. The ink itself has its own story. In the 1780s, many cartographers used iron gall ink, which starts as a deep midnight black, but matures over the decades into a warm, soulful sepia. Across the vast expanse where Grand Tartary is written, the calligraphy is breathtaking. The letters are elegant and looping, with long, graceful flourishes that turn a simple name into a work of art. You can see the varying pressure of the quill, the thin, delicate upstrokes, and the bold, confident downstrokes that give the word a sense of movement, as if the name itself is drifting across the plains it describes. In the corners of these maps, you often find the cartouche, a decorative frame that holds the title and the name of the map maker. These were not merely functional, they were windows into the imagination of the time. Around the name of Tartary, a cartouche might feature sketches of camels resting by a spring, or figures in flowing robes holding traditional instruments. These illustrations were often hand-colored with soft washes of watercolor, pale ochres, muted greens, and dusty roses, applied with a brush so fine it might have consisted of only a few hairs. And then there are the filling elements that make these old maps so enchanting. In the vast, unexplored stretches of the interior, or the deep reaches of the northern oceans, the cartographers would often place a compass rose. These were intricate, star-like designs, sometimes gilded with a tiny bit of gold leaf that still catches the light with a dull, regal shimmer. They point toward a north that was as much a mystery as a destination. In the blue painted waters off the coast of Chinese Tartary, you might find the occasional sea monster, a curling serpent with shimmering scales, or a whale depicted with the majestic, terrifying features of a dragon. To a modern eye, these might seem like errors, but in the 18th century, they represented the wonderful boundary between the known and the unknown. They were a way of saying that the world was still full of magic, and that even the empty spaces on a map were filled with stories. There is a profound charm in this historical inaccuracy. These maps represent the very limit of human knowledge at a specific moment in time. They are a snapshot of how we tried to organize the infinite complexity of the earth using only ink, paper, and bravery. When you look at the fading borders of Tartary, you aren't looking at a mistake. You are looking at a beautiful, hand-drawn dream of a world that was still being discovered. The softness of the colors and the steady rhythm of the engraved lines create a sense of deep historical calm. It is a reminder that even as our knowledge grows sharper and more precise, there is a quiet, timeless grace in the way we used to see the world, as a place of mystery, artistry, and infinite wonder. Everything on the page is still preserved in a golden amber of ink and time, inviting you to simply look and breathe and let the details wash over you like a gentle tide. As we dwell on the beauty of these ancient maps, I want you to take a moment to simply be present in this quiet space. Imagine, for a moment, that one of these large hand-pressed sheets of 18th century paper is laid out before you on a heavy wooden table. The room around you is dimly lit, perhaps by the flickering glow of a single candle, or the pale silver light of a moon peering through a high window. Everything is still. Reach out in your mind and feel the texture of that paper. It isn't like the smooth, bleached sheets we use today. It is thick and slightly irregular, with soft, fibrous edges that speak of the cotton and linen from which it was made. As you lay your hand upon it, notice how the surface feels surprisingly cool to the touch, a crisp, grounding coolness that seems to settle your thoughts. Now, imagine extending a single finger and placing it at the very edge of the map, near the bottom corner where the ocean begins. Slowly, very slowly, begin to trace a path upward. Feel the gentle friction of the paper against your skin. As your finger moves, let your breath follow its journey. Take a slow, deep breath in as you move your hand toward the center of the continent, toward that vast open space once labeled Grand Tartary. Hold that breath for just a second, feeling the fullness in your chest, and then, as your finger glides over a mountain range depicted in delicate, jagged ink, let the air out in a long, quiet sigh. Your finger moves across the steppes, over the winding curves of rivers that flow toward the frozen north. With every inch you travel on this paper landscape, feel your body becoming heavier and more relaxed. Your shoulders, which may have been holding on to the day's tension, begin to drop away from your ears. They feel loose, soft, and completely supported by the bed beneath you. Notice the rhythm of your breathing now. It has become steady and effortless, like the ebb and flow of a calm sea, in and out, in and out. Just like the repetitive, rhythmic motion of the engraver's tool as they carve the copper plates for these maps, your breath is a constant, soothing presence. As you continue to trace the invisible lines of history, notice the small details. Perhaps your finger passes over a tiny, hand-drawn forest, each tree a microscopic dot of green. Or maybe you find a small village represented by a cluster of red-roofed buildings no larger than a grain of sand. There is so much care in these details, so much patience. Allow yourself to absorb that same patience. There is no rush. There is nowhere else you need to be. The map is a quiet world, and you are simply a traveler passing through its silent borders. Feel the weight of your limbs now sinking deeper into the soft layers of your blankets. Your jaw is relaxed. Your eyes are heavy and still behind your lids. The cool sensation of the paper under your imaginary fingertip is fading now, replaced by the warmth and safety of your own room. You are safe. You are comfortable. The vast mysteries of the world are tucked away in the archives of the past. And for now, all that matters is the gentle rise and fall of your chest. The world of Tartary, with its shifting sands and ancient names, is a peaceful place to wander in your dreams. We are moving toward a state of complete rest, where the labels of the world no longer matter, and only the quiet, steady pulse of the present remains. Stay here for a moment in this perfect stillness as we prepare to look at how other parts of our world have changed their names, drifting from one identity to another as easily as a cloud moves across a summer sky. It is a comforting thought, isn't it? That the world we live in is not a static, finished thing, but a living, breathing tapestry that we are constantly relearning. The vanishing of Tartary is not a lonely event in history. If you look closely at the maps of the past, you will find a long trail of names that once seemed permanent, only to drift away like autumn leaves on a slow-moving stream. Think of the name Abyssinia. For centuries, travelers and poets spoke of this ancient land with a sense of deep reverence. It was a name that carried the weight of stone churches and high, misty plateaus. Today, we call that land Ethiopia. The mountains have not moved. The sun still rises over the same rugged highlands, and the ancient traditions continue to pulse through the heart of the people. Only the label has changed, shifting to reflect a deeper, more sovereign identity. It is as if the land itself decided to put on a new garment, one that fit its spirit more closely. Or consider the island of Ceylon. To the sailors of the past, navigating by the stars and the scent of the breeze, it was a place of cinnamon and emeralds, a teardrop resting in the warm waters of the Indian Ocean. Today, we know it as Sri Lanka. The waves still lap against those same golden shores with a rhythmic, hypnotic sound. The air still carries the sweet, heavy scent of spice. The map has simply matured, becoming more precise and more respectful of the local voice. Even the majestic islands of Hawaii were once marked on European charts as the Sandwich Islands. Can you imagine such a vibrant volcanic paradise named after an English earl? As time passed and the world grew smaller through connection, the indigenous name returned, restoring the island's true spirit to the global record. These changes are a natural part of our collective journey. Sometimes a name fades because of a political shift, a new independence, or a desire to reclaim a heritage that was overlooked. Other times, names change simply because we become better observers. In the early days of global exploration, large parts of the world were labeled with broad, sweeping terms. You might see terra incognita, unknown land, scrawled across a continent, or the great American desert, covering the vast fertile plains of the West. As explorers walked the ground, as scientists measured the soil, and as cartographers spoke with the people who actually lived there, those vague labels began to dissolve. They were replaced by the names of specific states, winding rivers, and hidden valleys. This process isn't a loss. It is a deepening of our friendship with the earth. It is like getting to know someone over a long, quiet lifetime. At first, you might only know their general appearance, their silhouette against the light. But as you spend time together, you learn their name, the stories of their ancestors, and the subtle nuances of their character. The world is the same way. We are constantly refining our language to match the reality of the landscape. Tartary was a chapter in that long unfolding book of learning. It was a vast, beautiful generalization, a way for people thousands of miles away to talk about a part of the world they didn't yet fully understand. As the ink dried on newer, more detailed maps, the word Tartary didn't disappear because the land vanished into the clouds. It disappeared because our understanding of the people, the cultures, and the geography grew too large and too complex to fit under a single, blurry umbrella. Feel the reassurance in that. The world is stable. The ground beneath us is firm. We are simply becoming better at naming the wonders we find. As you drift closer to sleep, let the idea of these changing names be a lullaby. The world is being rediscovered every day, and even as the old names fade into the quiet archives of history, the beauty of the land remains, waiting for us to wake up and see it clearly. We are moving now into a time when the vague outlines of the 18th century began to sharpen into the world we recognize today, as the 19th century brought a finality to the maps of old. As we move into the heart of the 1800s, we see the world undergoing a profound and steady transformation. It was a century of measurement, of precision, and of a deep desire to understand the Earth's features with absolute clarity. If you were to open an atlas in the year 1850, you would notice something remarkable. The expansive, sweeping letters that once spelled out Grand Tartary across the center of Asia had almost entirely vanished. In their place was a new kind of map, one that felt more structured, more organized, and more permanent. By 1850, the transition was nearly complete. The vague romantic notions of the 18th century had given way to the systematic reality of the 19th. The vast territory that had once been labeled under that single misty name was now divided by sharp, clear lines. To the north and west, the colors of the Russian Empire had deepened and solidified, labeled now as provinces with names like Siberia and Turkestan. To the east, the Qing dynasty had asserted its borders with newfound cartographic detail, marking the lands of Manchuria and Mongolia with specific administrative boundaries. The world was being tidied, like a large library where books were finally being placed in their proper numbered slots. This period saw the rise of the modern nation-state, a concept that changed how we perceive the very ground we walk upon. Before this time, borders were often fluid. They were zones of influence, shifting like the grass in the wind. But in the 19th century, the world began to favor hard borders. Explorers were no longer just adventurers looking for wonders. They were surveyors carrying heavy brass instruments, measuring the curve of the earth and the height of the mountain passes. They used theodolites and long, clinking chains to mark exactly where one country ended and another began. As these lines were drawn, the broad regional label of Tartary simply had no place to rest. It was too wide, too general, for a world that now demanded exactness. Imagine the map makers of this era, sitting in quiet rooms filled with the scent of iron gall ink and fresh paper. They were using new techniques, like steel engraving, which allowed for much finer lines than the older copper plates. This precision allowed them to fill the map with the details that had never been there before. The exact winding path of a river, the location of a small mountain well, the specific names of local towns and villages. As the detail increased, the mystery of the interior began to evaporate. The great unknown was being filled in, one village and one valley at a time. The finality of this name change was not an act of erasure, but an act of octus. By the middle of the 19th century, the term Tartary was mostly found in the back of dusty history books or on the tongues of the oldest generation. The younger generation of the 1850s looked at the world through the lens of political geography. They saw a world of empires, treaties, and international law. To them, the map was a legal document as much as a geographical one. The disappearance of the name was the final step in the world's transition into the modern age, a time when we decided that every corner of the earth should have a specific, recognized name that the whole world agreed upon. As you lie there, feel the stillness of this organized world. There is a comfort in knowing that the landscape has been so carefully observed and recorded. The 19th century brought a sense of order to the vastness of the Asian continent, turning a wild mystery into a known and mapped reality. The transition was complete. The maps of the 1850s looked very much like the maps we use today, with the same familiar shapes and names. The era of the Great Tartary had passed into the quiet archives of the soul, leaving behind a world that was clearly defined, safe, and understood. The ink had dried and the borders were set. But while these names faded from the active maps of the world, they didn't disappear entirely. They were simply moved to a different kind of home, a place where time moves more slowly and where the air is thick with the peaceful scent of the past. As we continue to drift toward a deeper rest, we can imagine where those old maps went, and the quiet, sacred spaces where they are still kept safe today. Imagine yourself walking through the heavy wooden doors of a great national library, a place where time seems to slow down until it almost stops. The sound of the outside world, the wind in the trees, the distant hum of life, the busy pace of the modern day, all of it fades away the moment the door clicks shut behind you. Here, in the heart of the archives, there is a profound silence. It is a silence so deep and heavy that it feels like a soft velvet blanket wrapped around your shoulders, shielding you from the noise of the present. The air in this place is different. It is cool and dry, carefully kept at a constant temperature to protect the delicate fibers of the past. As you breathe in slowly, you can smell the scent of history. It is a comforting, earthy aroma, a blend of old leather bindings, the faint vanilla-like sweetness of aging paper, and a hint of the beeswax used to polish the dark, towering shelves that reach toward the ceiling. It is the smell of a sanctuary, a place where knowledge goes to rest and be remembered. In the specialized map room, the ceilings are high and the windows are tall and narrow. Through them, long beams of soft, golden afternoon light stretch across the stone floor. If you look closely at these beams of light, you can see tiny dust motes drifting lazily, rising and falling in a slow, rhythmic dance. They move with no hurry at all, floating on the quiet air, much like the gentle rhythm of your own breathing as you settle deeper into your bed. Along the walls of this room are hundreds of wide, shallow drawers made of heavy, dark oak. Each drawer has a small brass handle, dulled to a soft glow by years of gentle touch. Inside these drawers, the maps of the 1700s and 1800s lie flat and still. They are resting on sheets of acid-free paper, protected from the harshness of the sun and the dampness of the air. They are sleeping. When an archivist enters this room, they move with a slow, steady grace. They wear soft, white cotton gloves to ensure that the oils from their skin never touch the ancient parchment. With a quiet click, they pull open one of the wide drawers. The sound of the wood sliding against wood is a low, soothing hum, and there, under the gentle glow of a shaded lamp, the name Grand Tartary appears once more. The ink hasn't changed. The gold leaf on the compass rose still catches the light with a soft, muted shimmer. The sea monsters drawn in the corners of the ocean are still frozen in their playful, mythical leaps. On these sheets of vellum, the borders of the 18th century are still as sharp as the day they were drawn. In this quiet archive, the name hasn't vanished at all. It has simply been moved from the active maps of the world to a state of eternal, peaceful preservation. There is something very reassuring about this thought, even as the world moves on, even as names change and empires rise and fall. The evidence of our journey is kept safe. It is tucked away in these quiet halls, protected by people who value the story of how we once saw the horizon. It is a sanctuary of memory, a place where the great unknown is still celebrated, and where the maps of the past are treated with the same reverence as a sacred text. As you drift closer to sleep, you can imagine yourself resting in one of the large leather chairs in that quiet library. You are surrounded by the peaceful scent of old books and the soft golden light of the archives. The world is mapped, the borders are known, and the history is safe. You don't need to hold on to the maps anymore. They are being held for you, tucked away in the cool, dark drawers of the past. Everything is exactly where it should be, and the world is at rest. As we sit in this quiet mental library, let's gently gather the pieces of our story together like folding a soft, well-worn map. The mystery of why the name Tartary faded from our world isn't a story of shadows or secrets, but a story of how our understanding grows, layer by layer, like the rings of an ancient tree. It is a peaceful transition, a slow turning of the page that we can now look back on with a sense of calm and clarity. Think of it as 3 gentle waves washing over the map, each one bringing the world into sharper focus. The first wave was the movement of empires. In the late 1700s and throughout the 1800s, the vast open spaces of Central Asia began to find new definitions. From the west, the Russian Empire moved steadily across the snowy forests and the wide, golden plains, bringing the land under a single, central administration. From the south and the east, the Qing dynasty of China extended its reach, defining its borders with new strength. Like two great slow-moving rivers meeting in a valley, these empires gathered the many smaller khanate and territories into their own. What mapmakers once called Grand Tartary was being woven into the fabric of these larger nations. The land remained the same. The wind still blew across the grass, and the people still watched the same stars. But the names on the official documents began to change. The second wave was the spirit of discovery and the riz of scientific mapping. During the Enlightenment, there was a deep, quiet hunger for precision. Geographers were no longer satisfied with broad, sweeping labels that covered thousands of miles. They wanted to measure the curve of the earth, the exact height of the mountains, and the precise path of every winding river. With their brass telescopes and mathematical tables, they replaced the poetic vagueness of Tartary with the cold, clear lines of latitude and longitude. They broke the vast region down into smaller, more accurate pieces. As the maps became more detailed, the old generalized name simply didn't have a place to rest anymore. It was outgrown by the very science that sought to describe it. The third wave was the natural evolution of language. As the world became more connected, the names we used for places began to reflect a deeper, more specific understanding of the people who lived there. The term Tartary had always been a word used by outsiders, a label given by those looking in from the distance. But as travelers and scholars spent more time in these lands, they began to use the names that the people used for themselves. Siberia, Mongolia, Turkestan, and Manchuria began to appear more frequently, offering a more respectful and accurate picture of the diverse cultures of the steppe. The old name didn't vanish in a moment of conflict. It drifted away like a morning mist as the sun of knowledge rose higher in the sky. Expansion, precision, language, these three movements worked together slowly and steadily to update the world's atlas. There is a great comfort in knowing that the disappearance of Tartary was actually an act of bringing the world closer, of learning its true face and calling its parts by their proper names. The mystery is solved not by finding something lost, but by understanding how we found our way home to a more accurate map. As you lie there, you can feel the satisfaction of this completion. The curiosity you felt at the beginning of our journey has been answered with the simple, steady truth of history. The world is a place of change, but it is also a place of order and growth. You can let go of the questions now, knowing that the story is whole. The maps are safe in their drawers, the history is recorded in its books, and the vast lands of the East are resting quietly under the night sky, just as they have for thousands of years. Everything is settled. Everything is at peace. Take a slow, deep breath and feel the weight of that knowledge grounding you, letting you sink even deeper into the stillness of your room. Now that the maps are folded and the ink has dried, let your mind wander away from the parchment and out into the landscape itself. Leave behind the dates, the empires, and the changing borders. Instead, imagine the actual Earth that those old maps tried to capture, the vast breathing heart of the Asian continent as it exists right now, in the deep velvet of the night. Imagine you are standing in the center of the great Eurasian steppe, the land that was once the very soul of Tartary. It is an ocean of grass that stretches toward every horizon, farther than the eye can see. At night, the wind here is nothing more than a soft, rhythmic sigh, moving through the tall blades like a gentle hand. There are no city lights here to dim the view, no hum of traffic to break the silence. There is only the immense open space and the cool, clean air that tastes of wild time and ancient earth. You can feel the incredible seal of the world beneath you, a solid and steady foundation that has remained unchanged while names and empires drifted overhead like passing clouds. Shift your gaze now to the south, toward the Gobi Desert. In the darkness, the dunes are like waves of frozen silk, carved into elegant curves by the wind. The heat of the day has radiated away into the atmosphere, leaving the sand cool and firm. The silence here is absolute, a profound, heavy stillness that seems to wrap around you like a soft blanket. Above the Gobi, the sky is a masterpiece of light. Because the air is so dry and the world below is so dark, the stars appear closer than you have ever seen them. They are not just tiny points of light. They are brilliant multicolored jewels, blue, white, and gold, pulsating slowly in the vacuum of space. The Milky Way stretches across the zenith like a river of silver mist, a glowing path that reminds you of how small and peaceful our corner of the universe truly is. Further to the north, the Altai Mountains rise up to meet the stars. These are the Golden Mountains, where the peaks are capped with eternal snow and glaciers that glow with a ghostly blue light under the moon. Imagine the stillness of a high mountain pass at midnight. The air is thin and crisp, and the only sound is the occasional distant crack of ice shifting deep within a glacier, a slow tectonic heartbeat. The valleys below are filled with deep shadows and the dark, fragrant spires of Siberian larch and pine trees. The forest is asleep, the needles of the trees dusted with a fine frost that sparkles like diamond dust in the moonlight. Think of Lake Baikal, the deepest and oldest lake on Earth, nestled in the heart of the Siberian wilderness. At night, the water is as still as a dark mirror, reflecting the constellation so perfectly that it feels as if the stars are floating in the abyss. The water is cold and pure, holding the memory of millions of years within its depths. There is a great power in this stillness, a sense of time moving so slowly that a single human life is but a heartbeat, and a single century is but a breath. This is the enduring reality of the land that was once called Tartary. It is not a mystery to be solved, but a presence to be felt. As you lie in the comfort of your own bed, let your spirit drift across these quiet places. Feel the cool wind of the steppe on your face. See the silver glow of the moon on the mountain peaks. Hear the profound silence of the desert night. The world is so much larger than our maps and our names for it. It is a place of infinite peace and staggering beauty, most of which exists in the quiet hours when the rest of the world is dreaming. You are part of this vast, interconnected world. The same moon that lights your window is shining down on the Gobi and the Altai, connecting you to the heart of the continent across thousands of miles. The earth is at rest. The great plains are sleeping, the mountains are standing watch, and the rivers are flowing softly toward the sea. There is nothing left to do, nothing left to learn, and nowhere else you need to be. The vastness of the world is not a weight, but a comfort, a reminder that you are held within a grand and orderly design. Take a slow, deep breath, drawing in the coolness of that mountain air, and as you exhale, let yourself sink even deeper into your pillows. The world is quiet, the story is told, and the stars are watching over everything. Everything is still. Everything is exactly as it should be. The maps of 1780 have been gently rolled up and placed back on their high, wooden shelves in the quiet archives of history. The ink has dried, the parchment is still, and the grand, sweeping name of Tartary has found its rightful place in the long, peaceful memory of the world. What once seemed like a vanishing mystery is now understood, a simple, beautiful transition of language, a sharpening of our collective vision, and the natural growth of our understanding of this vast and wondrous planet. The mystery is solved, the questions have been answered, and the mind can now let go of every detail, every date, and every border. The world we have explored tonight is at rest. From the high frozen peaks of the Altai Mountains to the shifting golden sands of the Gobi, a profound silence has fallen. The great steppes are bathed in the silver light of a moon that cares little for the names we give to the land. To the earth, it is all one continuous, breathing landscape of forests, rivers, and plains. And you too are a part of this quiet unity. You are safe, you are warm, and you are exactly where you are meant to be. Feel the weight of your body as it sinks deeper into the mattress, supported and held. The air in your room is cool and still, matching the rhythmic, easy flow of your breath. With every slow exhale, imagine you are releasing the last lingering thoughts of the day, letting them drift away like autumn leaves on a slow-moving river. There is no more history to uncover, no more geography to map. The story is complete. The journey across the centuries is over, and the path has led you right back here to this moment of perfect stillness. As the stars continue their slow, silent dance across the sky, let your eyes grow heavier. The darkness is a soft blanket, tucking you in, shielding you from the noise of the waking world. Sleep is a vast, calm ocean, and you are drifting peacefully on its surface, moving further and further into a deep and restorative rest. The names of the past are just echoes now, fading into the gentle hum of the night. The world is quiet, the earth is still. The mystery has faded into the peace of the present. You have learned all you need to know, and now the only thing left to do is to drift, to let go, and to sleep. May your dreams be as vast and serene as the open plains. May your rest be as deep as the mountain valleys. Everything is well, everything is at peace. Sleep now, sleep, sleep. Good night.